Player Will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Ramada character review, the brand new Lightning Pierce-oriented unit added to Global this week. And today's character review, pretty standard topics that we'll end up going through, as you can see on the screen here. As we kick things off with the character overview, the brand new Lightning unit with the unique main job of Astro Lancer with the subjobs of Strider and Spellblade in there as well. She does equip spears and cloths, hats, and accessories for the other types of equipment. She does have a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit, and I am recommending 50 faith, but I think you have opportunities to go higher, though right now may not be the best time in the game to do so. She does have some curse capability at an elevated proc rate, but there's really no other status effects in her kit, and so when you open yourself up to more status effects, I just think it's not great timing at the moment, not to mention that you will receive higher magic damage on average because of how faith works itself into the damage calculation overall. And sure, while you may receive more healing from it, I think it's better just to play it safe at the 50 for now, but there's definitely room up depending on the meta shifts. Now, her job has a max range of 5 squares away with 2 AoE abilities, 2 unit scaling abilities. Her only negative resistance is the minus 10% to strike, so certainly be on the lookout for that. From an ailment perspective, 50% to frostbite certainly helps against Gilgamesh and the uptick of other frostbite-oriented units. Also 50% to Berserk, which is certainly nice because Sephiroth technically has that on his subjob too, as well as the good old-fashioned Vega TMR, so it's nice that she's insulated from that. But she does have the 10% curse resistance as well, and although it's not going to stop it in its entirety, it does certainly still bring the percentage chance down a little bit, so it's more of a coin flip against your average Sephiroth in terms of how often you get cursed. Now, she does permanently have 10% magic damage reduction as well, 15% debuff weakening, the 30% acquired AP, all from her mastery ability. On the Dream, they gave her a bunch of extra attack stat, 15 unit res, and 15 crit evasion as well. As we get into the rest of the stats here, base stat-wise, she's right in line with all the 4th anniversary units. Her HP pool is basically in that same bucket as all of them. The base attack stat, certainly still very high. It's not at the highest tier, but I don't think it really has a tangible effect on the results. The dexterity stat is also above average here, and she is a crit rate-oriented unit, so this is very promising to see, as well as the base luck stat certainly does help her accuracy, all things considered. And the other stats, when you consider the board nodes, the mastery ability, things of that nature, overall ends up in a relatively good spot. I don't really think there's any glaring weaknesses here from an innate stat perspective. She's relatively speedy from a pure stats view, and the rest of them honestly are in a pretty good spot. The HP in particular is actually very high for what most DPS have, even the new ones. Now, from an agility perspective, as I mentioned, she is relatively fast innately, but has no passive ability to amplify it any further, so she comes at that 85, and while that is pretty fast, when you do compare her to units that can equip passives, they are normally in that 87 to 92 range. She's just a tier below that, so she's not a slow unit. She's still above average, but not to the level of the DPS that we've seen as of late. The other stats, that crit hit rate, not as high as I would have liked to see personally, but she does have a passive that does greatly amplify it. Her base dexterity is still pretty strong, so overall could be worse, but it is a pretty good spot. The crit avoidance rate she does skew very high on as well because of that innate crit evasion that she comes with on the 140 ability. The innate accuracy is also very good here, and in addition to that, she does have an accuracy passive which can further amplify it, so I'm very happy with her from an accuracy perspective, and even the evasion perspective. It's on the bottom end of the gradient. The thing with this is that lightning units and spear units really have never had any vision card support for evasion, so you might be able to get away with some luck percentage here and there. I really would not consider even her a pseudo evade unit. I don't really see much upside for that like some of these other 4th anniversary units. Now, when we get to the report card, again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can certainly read them. The overall final grade for me is a B+. Her strengths for me are her great effective HP, and most of that is driven by the fact of AoE wide res that she gets access to, and the 10% permanent magic reduction. Her buffs and survivability too, not as typical as we're used to seeing with barriers and courage and re-raise. She does have the courage capability, but she's more of a damage absorption kind of unit, and really just a higher effective HP kind of unit. That's how she really gets around on the battlefield. The damage is pretty good too, all things considered. Very high crit rate. She does have a crit damage in peril that we'll talk more about in the job and abilities. She does have a ton of AoE res pen and a really good attack stat, she's just like all other Pierce units at the mercy of how high the enemy Pierce resistance is, because there's really no Pierce res penetration in the game for her. Agility is fine, it's above average, but there's really no way to amplify it. The accuracy, very happy with. The evasion has already covered that. The movement is a D for me because there is no movement altering capabilities anywhere in the kit, not even on any buffs. She's stuck at the move 3 jump 1, which is fine, but does make it difficult on some maps and for some team building that you don't have any kind of flexibility or wiggle room there. The auto ease of use is a B minus. The AI is pretty straightforward, but I do think she's a more difficult rainbow unit to use compared to other units you're used to, and not having any agility passives or movement optionality makes her hard to kind of use in a variety of teams and maps. Also, the game disruption for me is a D because she really just doesn't solve any meta issues. She is a permanent pull unit, and the spear group is pretty depleted at the moment from a power creep perspective. So I really don't see a ton of synergies where you're going to see her splashing and popping up everywhere. Now, passive abilities, excellent passives. The counter abilities, surprisingly bad in my opinion. We'll talk about that on that slide, but I'm not a fan of the counter ability. The overall job and kit I do like though. There's utility up and down her kit. The damage is certainly there. Overall, I think it's very strong, but when you consider the state of the game and what the bar is of most meta units, she's genuinely not a bad unit, but I think the bar is set so high she falls short compared to there, so I'm going with that final B+. Now, just for some general thoughts, again, the cons to me that outweighs the pros. Kind of like a broken record. I've talked about a couple of these, but alongside the damage conversation, she does not have any crushes or imperils. While she does have things like Dispel Protect, Dispel AoE Wide Res, the crit damage imperil, there's alternate ways she wants to still do her damage. Those are some really basic ones that we look for from like a team fight utility perspective. And honestly, the sub jobs are kind of a miss too, where they don't really lend it themselves to any kind of creativity in terms of alternative damage types. We'll talk about that in a couple slides, but she does have some great offensive things. I don't want to undersell that. Her AoE res pen is absolutely off the charts, and the defense pen is certainly at among the highest levels you'll see in practice. Loads of crit damage potential here, the dispel of certain kinds of mitigations as we talked about, and her main ability is a physical barrier break. So obviously love to see that too, where it's a little more short range, but it's still a really good application of it. She is an amazing PvE unit though. She does have slow capability on the sub job. She does have a couple different triple hits, and that crit damage imperil, which we'll talk about on the main job, is really great for PvE and ensuring that your damage capping as often as you are. Now, she does have 50% curse chance, and that's kind of nice, but the game is currently kind of tuned against curse, so I really don't see this as all that valuable right now today, but a couple months from now, when Sephiroth starts to subside, this will certainly still catch some people off guard. She does have some exceptional AP management, though. It's probably some of the best that I can recall in recent memory. With acquired AP, the weapon has AP reduction, a passive ability does too. Her main buff is 20 AP, in addition to what you generate from the TP conversion, where every buff you use, that TP number, you cut it in half, and that's what you gain before any kind of acquired AP percents are added to it. She does also get 10 AP on critical hit, and her ability costs overall just skew cheaper compared to some units. And as mentioned, she does have that very high effective HP, and a lot of that is due to the AoE wide res that she has, and just the innate HP levels themselves. She does skew very high. Now, should you pull though? My answer is no, if only because I don't think she solves any problems with the current meta. That's not to say she can't compete. Already in my mocking, she can compete, but some of that is the map bonus that's been giving to lightning units. I think in a couple of weeks when that map bonus is gone, you'll see a little bit of a difference there, but the team building is a little more difficult and niche for your average player. She is permanent pull, so you can always pull her later and slow build her, and it just comes down to a simple economics question that the things that are upcoming with the Trials of Mana collaboration, the vision cards you have to pull for that, the future Sodali unit and his vision card, there's just better return on investment compared to what you likely will get if you spend that Visior on Ramada. Now, the passive abilities, Astro Asylum is an absolute must. You're going to have this on 100% of the time. It's really a toss-up whether Wild Instinct or the Astrological Spearmanship is your second choice. They're both equally good. They just do two different things. One of them is the accuracy and defense pen. The other one is the crit rate and the AP consumption down. Now, I think I'd likely tend to have Wild Instinct on just because I really do value that accuracy in this very high luck percent era. There's a lot of cards right now with luck percent on them, so you never want to miss any attacks by accident when you really shouldn't. And obviously the damage increase here certainly is nice too, but I don't think it's hard set in stone. Now the counter abilities, this one I kind of downplayed in the report card. This is a 80% chance to proc, so very high proc rate, to give 70% attack, and that's, if for her, 308 attack stat for 3 turns. The problem is it's only for slash and missile damage. I probably would like this more if it was all kinds of damage, but this to me is just extremely niche. I don't really think it does anything to turn the tide of the fight for you compared to what most other counter abilities do in the modern era of the game. This one's fine, but the other ones too are also very lackluster, so not a big fan in this regard. The main job buffs, that teammate buff does have some good buffs on it with the unit res, the crit rate. The restore AP on crit rate is certainly very, very nice. It's been a while since we've had a unit that had something like this. She does give courage on here as well, and absorbs 50% of the damage done for 4 turns for herself. The single target buff after, which is her self buff, is the 25% magic reduction. It also gives herself protect and is the increased chance to curse on her main ability that we'll see, in addition to the AoE res pen. So both of these buffs are very important, in my opinion, to really getting her to the level that she needs to be at. Now for the main job offensive abilities, just a quick hit here. This second one here is the crit damage imperil I keep referencing, and the way this works is every time you crit hit a unit, they will take 20% more damage from that crit hit. And that's really it in a nutshell how that works. So this does do very well for PvE, and for a unit that does tend to have higher crit rate. Her vision card has crit damage for the dual mode. There's obviously crit damage cards for spear and whatnot, that this certainly aligns with where she needs to be for her damage output. But the main ability here, this giant cross shape, is the barrier break. It's 100% counter reduction for all enemies within it, and also a 20% physical damage reduction to those units as well. And that's where that curse percent chance is. And it's technically an elevated percent here once you have your self buff online. So it is higher than that 25%. And finally, this much shorter range square is still a really good ability. It's the Dispel Protect, it's Dispel AoE Wide Res. I like that it's both physical and magical, because that does do good things for teammates. That should you be pairing her with a magic unit that has a lot of AoE type of attacks, and maybe they don't have AoE wide res removal, this certainly will do well for that teammate as well. And there is a huge modifier increase if the enemy is cursed, hasted, or AP restore, which obviously lots of units currently in the game typically have one of those 3 attributes active. So overall, very happy with what the main job does. The limit break is also very good. It's a 20% increase in physical damage. It's a great modifier at 240%. It's a decreased CT of 50 to those enemies and 250 to herself. So we've seen time and time again how important these limit breaks are, whether it's Faris or Valentine Eldyra, what it does to really like shift the turn order in your favor. This is no exception. It's at a very valuable and affordable 43 AP as well. Now for the sub jobs here, this is one that I really don't like. I don't really see a ton of value in this sub job outside of PvE, where this is another great triple hit that has the agility percent down, which certainly can be very valuable in PvE content. The Doom is kind of a whatever ability in my opinion though, so this is kind of a miss. The Strider sub job, kind of the same idea. This slow capability is good for PvE, but really not good for the auto PvP. And while this buff here for the accuracy percent is nice, I guess, I really would not prefer it to her main 2 buffs on the main job. So I don't think this is good enough to make up for it, which leaves us Process of Elimination with the Spellblade sub, and I really only like the magic barrier here. I'll be honest, I think this is an exceptional 3rd buff. That being said, there's just nothing else on this job that I think brings value. So sure, if you can get a 3rd turn and get a 70% magic barrier, that's going to be very, very strong in the current and upcoming meta. So at least a thumbs up for that. Now for the TMR review, this is not the worst TMR that we've seen in the last couple of weeks. 5 agility certainly stands out. It's a cloth type, unfortunately, but I love the 18% crit rate on here. That is higher than what most items tend to have. And this ability, although probably isn't all that valuable current day, just because of how much AP restore removal there is right now, a teammate buff that gives you and really everyone 5% AP auto restore is nice to have access to at some point in the future. Just probably not the best time today, but I could see some future use for this TMR, absolutely. Now, for the job-based vision cards, the strongest synergies by far are Staff Devout and Katana. Now, there are a lot of other great synergies. It's just unfortunate that most of the units in these classes are slightly more power crept. Dagger is one of the best classes. There was a time where Mace was very strong, as was Axe, but a lot of those units, those classes really just aren't all that strong anymore. And so while there is a ton of great different vision card synergy, I really think it is a little more confined to just the Katana and Staff Devout teams, which is a little more limiting, but those are two very strong teams, so there's nothing wrong with that. Now, for the equipment and optimization, her unique weapon, I think, is fine. This is lightning unit, so it's not just Ramada. It's the AP consumption decrease. It's 15% AoE wide res on magical tap attacks. That brings her up to 30% innately with that passive. And the 20 Pierce res pen, I like the crit rate version of this build, so I'm building this personally just to make sure I can get that crit rate as high as I can for her. For the other equipments, the Dragon Spear is certainly a valuable spear too, but I don't think it's better than the Star Burial Spear, but it's not a bad option. The other equips, honestly, I would just go with the Alex Ring most of the time, or the Genji Glove, where I don't see a ton of value in the pods or the Survival Vest, just because we're seeing a little more of an uptick in the unit res pen as of late. But obviously all of these items are still very valuable and worth the analysis. And then for the Espers, I like all the typical DPS Espers. Dark Odin, Bahamut, Odin, Ultros. Voldisk, though, is a low-key favorite of mine, though, where this is a great anti-magic Esper. It has the lightning attack up on it. It has the magic res, the magic damage reduction, the reaction block rate on it. So there's a lot of great stuff on that Esper. And then for the TMRs, we talked about her agility, how she does not have any agility passives. So for me, I would just put on a very speedy TMR, turn it off, not use the ability, and just use it as a stat stick just to make sure she can get her two main buffs off and potentially that magic barrier, which I absolutely love. So I think you're fine with all the buffs on the main job, that I really don't see the need to play with any kind of TMR options for her. Now for the Truststones, left side's pretty standard here. HP, defense, spirit, and luck are all certainly viable. It just depends on what meta you're playing into, if you want the accuracy or the extra healing power. The left side is pretty standard here too. Obviously, I don't go in depth on the left because it's always meta dependent. The right side, though, agility is by far my favorite. Sure, you could entertain the accuracy, but I think that losing the 6 agility points hurts her a lot, so I would stick with agility. And honestly, the passives, I'm happy with these 6 that I've listed, but you can certainly swap out the crit rate or the defense pen for the heal power 10, depending upon which passives you have equipped, where both of these may be not necessary, and the healing power of 10 certainly does help her damage absorption as well as any kind of external healing she'll receive. But I think if you're sticking to these 6, you're relatively safe overall. And my favorite teams, this is where things are a little bit more limited because, sure, you can run a mono lightning team. I have that listed here second with Lucille and Elia. I actually like this team a lot. I've seen some good results with it. The top team, though, with the Staff Devout and Katana synergy, as I mentioned, is probably her best team overall at the moment. Although theoretically, I think Resnick is a great substitute here too, just to make sure that Ramada does not get cursed. She can also obviously remove the follow-up attacks as part of Resnick's buff. That I think any of these 3 teams on the left will be very competitive, and the ones on the right are probably more copium. I think the mono spear days are gone. I think Fang, unfortunately, has been power crept a little too hard, and I do think Eld is just barely hanging on by a thread. I have Eld, and this bottom team actually looks pretty good at the moment, but it's not perfect. It's still very tricky. So team building remains to be seen, but there's only a couple that I really think will let her hit her ceiling given the current state of the game. And that's the Ramada review overall. This is a very high quality unit. It's just not a meta defining unit. She is a excellent addition to the permanent pool for Lightning, where that element has been getting a lot more love from a permanent pool perspective as of late. I do think that she's the kind of unit that will get better with reincarnations if you decide to invest in her, because she does have that very high natural effective HP, in addition to overall strong attack numbers, all things considered, in addition to the dexterity and crit rate you get from that reincarnation. So if you're a Ramada fan, I'll be honest, I think she still can be a good investment for you. I just don't think she's going to turn the tides of the game by any means. But that's my thoughts overall. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to y'all later.